Thank you. Welcome and good morning. My name is Courtney Knupp. I'm with the U.S. Soybean Export Council, and I'm our Director for Global Nutrition Meals, so focused on particularly soybean meal and swine diets. We're very excited to bring you the third of three seminars in this series focused on African swine fever in the Americas region. As we've previously discussed on the first two seminars, it's very important that as the Western Hemisphere, a region that does not currently have ASF, that we stand together in how we stay educated on this topic and stay up to date on how this is transpiring. So I want to welcome you all to this third seminar. As I said, first and foremost, the previous two seminars were recorded. 2 weeks ago, our first seminar focused on an overview and a global situation on African swine fever. The second last week focused on transmission and risk management. And those recordings are available both in the invite that you use to register for this meeting and on the USEC YouTube channel. So if you have questions about that, don't hesitate to reach out and we can provide you those links if you were not able to attend. We've been very fortunate across this series to have some great panelists from the United States, from the U.S. National Pork Board, from the U.S. American Feed Industry Association, and the United States Department of Agriculture. And we have two of our speakers back today to speak about that. Today's session, as I mentioned, is really focused on risk mitigation. And we want to focus on some applied examples of what is happening in the Americas and with our partner countries that we can think of to share with all of you. So specifically, we want to talk about biosecurity. We're going to talk about regionalization and compartmentalization. We're going to focus on risk-based and data-driven decision-making for regionalization and compartmentalization. And of course, our panelists will be back to answer any questions that you have throughout this seminar. Please put those questions in the chat. So I want to quickly introduce our speakers today. Our first speaker will be Dr. Lisa Becton. Dr. Lisa Becton is the Director of Swine Health at the National Pork Board. She is responsible for oversight of swine health research on emerging domestic and foreign animal diseases, developing biosecurity resources for youth and farms, and leads the African Swine Fever Working Group. She works with multiple organizations such as the AVMA, the USAHA, and FFAR to ensure that the voice for all U.S. pork producers is heard in support of research for swine health, production, and well-being. Prior to the Pork Board, joining that in 2008, Dr. Becton was the lead veterinarian for two different integrated swine companies and focused on herd health protocols, including vaccination and treatment guidelines, biosecurity, and surveillance for diseases. Dr. Becton received her Bachelor's of Science degree in biology from Lenoir-Rhyne College in 1990, her Doctor of Veterinary Medicine from North Carolina State University, and her Master's of Science in Food Safety from Michigan State University, the College of Veterinary Medicine. Dr. Becton also had the opportunity in 2001 to work at the Foreign Animal Disease Diagnostic Laboratory in the United States, which is located at Plum Island, New York, where she was able to learn about and identify foreign animal diseases of livestock. Dr. Becton is a diplomat with the American College of Veterinary Preventative Medicine since 2013. And our second speaker is also returning to visit us again and share all of her knowledge, but she's the Swine Health Senior Staff Officer at the Surveillance Coordination, Trichina Programs, Hemorrhagic Foreign Animal Diseases, including African swine fever and classical swine fever. Very well-rounded, very great resource and leader in the foreign animal disease space at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, specifically in the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, Veterinary Services. So Dr. Maria or Celia Antignoli is a swine health senior staff officer with the Aquaculture, Swine, Equine, and Poultry Commodity Health Center in APHIS Veterinary Services based in Colorado. She was born and raised in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where she obtained her DVM degree from Buenos Aires University and a PhD in epidemiology from Colorado State University. Celia joined APHIS Veterinary Services in 2008, and in January 2015, she became the director of the Surveillance Design and Analysis Unit. In this role, she provided leadership for the design, evaluation, analyses, and communication of surveillance of livestock and poultry diseases, both domestically and internationally. And in March 2019, Celia joined the swine health team, where she's involved in the implementation of all swine surveillance activities, including active surveillance for swine foreign hemorrhagic fevers. Celia participates as a subject matter expert for classical and African swine fever in several international working groups, including the OIE, the Food and Agriculture Organizations of the United Nations, and other international and domestic forums. So I very much like to welcome our speakers. We're going to start our seminar today talking about biosecurity, and specifically in the United States, we are working on regarding the Secure Pork Supply and the Pork Quality Assurance Plus program. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Lisa Becton with the National Pork Board.
Good morning. Thank you, Courtney, for that great introduction, and to the audience, thank you for giving me the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with you talking about some of the programs that we're working on to help prevent some of these devastating diseases. Okay, so what I'm going to talk today about is just biosecurity. How do we utilize that as defense against all of these existing and even emerging threats against animal health and production? You know, when we look at swine diseases, there are a lot of different challenges that we have, and I'm not going to list all of them, but many of these are diseases that we see every day, such as porcine respiratory and reproductive syndrome or influenza, and even within the last several years, porcine epidemic diarrhea virus. However, things that we really do not want to have to take action against are things like African swine fever. And luckily, we do not currently have that disease in the Western Hemisphere, and we'd like to keep it that way. So again, why are we concerned about African swine fever? And some of you have probably seen this slide before, but it will halt all trade the moment that it's identified. And that can be damaging for any of us that do export any type of pork and meat products and pork products. More logistical issues within a state or country is the halt of animals. And this is really true for North America. It would provide a halt of all animal movements for at least 72 hours once ASF is identified, because that will allow time to understand what is going on at the farm that was first identified, but also what's going around the farms. Other things include quarantine and removal of animals. But things that people don't realize is the impact it will have on other agriculture industries. And so this includes the feed industry, any of our processing and harvest facilities, other livestock movements, because transportation may be shared, fuel, personnel, etc. So even though this affects swine, any identification of African swine fever will actually impact all of agriculture. And it's more concerning because we don't have a vaccine. Here's a global picture. Really, it does impact a wide swath across the world, predominantly in Asia, in Russia. Obviously, it originated in Africa, but there's also now entrenched populations in Europe. And so that's very, very concerning when we look at the Western Hemisphere and try to understand what our risks are and what do we do to keep this virus out. So how did African swine fever spread so rapidly? We don't have a definitive way or mechanism of how this virus transmitted. There's many different speculations of how it may have moved, whether through garbage feeding or illegal importation of contaminated pork products or infected pigs. Did it move through vehicles? Did it move through other fomites? We know feral hogs can transmit the virus to other feral swine as well as commercial production, but we don't know 100% where it came from. But one thing we do know is the lack or poor biosecurity implementation really aggravates the situation and allows for widespread of the virus if not practiced. So where does that lead us as far as disease mitigation and control strategies? We do know a lot of our pathogens that we face, both foreign and domestic diseases, don't always have vaccines. And sometimes if they do have vaccines, they may not always hit all the boxes as far as preventing disease and preventing disease spread. But with that being said, many vaccines that do, or many pathogens that do have vaccines, if we aren't implementing other strategies to prevent transmission, those pathogens can still spread rapidly. And so that leads us back to being able to prevent and to prepare in the event of a disease. Both of these actions are critical. And the key cornerstone of a lot of these actions is biosecurity. And so having a sound plan is an absolute must to be able to assess risk and then also to be able to take action to mitigate that risk. So what do you look for in a biosecurity plan development? And so when we discuss this with other producers, biosecurity really is any step or procedure taken in or around a farm to reduce the risk of disease introduction into a herd. But also it's important to understand that it does need to be incorporated into a daily work routine. For me, I always assess it. Biosecurity can be simple, but it also should make biological sense. Because if we're not addressing the biology and the transmission nature of a pathogen, then we're going to miss the mark to help prevent it. And I say simple because a lot of times procedures that we do don't have to be very complicated. They just have to be very focused and address a true risk. And so things like wearing coveralls and boots, or even foot coverings before you go into a farm to reduce the chance of bringing it from the outside of the farm to the inside of the farm. Simple things such as gates and barriers to preventing people that are not authorized to be on the farm from entering. Because again, if people don't know what's going on in a farm, they can unknowingly bring something in if they try to enter a building. And things like sanitation. Sanitation is also a cornerstone of biosecurity because if we reduce the pathogen population within a farm or around a farm, that also reduces the chance of disease transmission. So the other key component is to really understand how do these diseases transmit. And there is a variety of different mechanisms, and some of these are disease specific. But things like pig to pig or direct contact, that's a very common and predominant method that diseases transmit. Another route is indirect, such as aerosol. We know things like influenza can transmit through air droplets and moisture droplets. There's other diseases that are vector-borne. where a biting insect like a mosquito, a tick, or a fly can transmit diseases. Diseases can also transmit by fomite or inanimate objects like boots, trailers, needles, sort boards, anything that may carry uh, any type of secretion that could be transmitted to another pig. And other things include foodborne. Some can be transmitted versus feed stuff in or on feeds, and also in the packaging that also contain feed. Now, a lot of our pathogens, such as African swine fever, can transmit a multitude of different ways, and really through direct route from pig to pig, through the bite of a tick, the Ornithodorus tick, through fomites. And we're also learning more and more about how these pathogens can spread via feedstuffs. And so those are all different things to really understand before you line out your plan, so you can focus in on areas that really will reduce the risk. So another key concept that we're incorporating both into pork quality assurance, but especially in secure pork supply, is this concept of create a line of separation. And this isn't a complex concept, but it's developing an imaginary line that separates an area that you want to be kept as disease-free versus other areas that you can't control or necessarily have risks in place for those. And so one of the things that we look at are areas such as the entire boundary of a farm. If you can put up gates and prevent people from entering, the line of separation would exist basically at the points of farm entry. And if you put gates or barriers up, people have to do things before they cross these barriers to get in. The same if we look at trailers as they back up to farms to load up pigs. If you have farm workers working animals into the chute, your line of separation really is at the back of the truck and at that line of where the chute basically bumps up with the truck. You don't want folks that are inside the truck coming into the farm, and conversely, you don't want folks that are loading pigs from the farm into the truck to go into the truck. And again, this addresses that risk of transference of disease from outside of the farm into the farm through via transportation. Other things that we look at is how do we get our workers in and out of our barns? You know, we can't go without workers. And so what are the things that we can do to reduce the risk of bringing in pathogens from our workforce? Obvious things are having the fence barrier or warning signs. And that's really to alert visitors that if you want to access our farms, please contact the farm managers or companies in order to do that. We require downtime away from other swine to come into a farm. And again, that's to reduce the risk that people could carry a disease in their nasal passages or on their skin or in their hair before they come to a farm. Another part is to record when you have visitors. Because again, if you understand where people are coming from and when they were at a farm, if you have to go back and do disease traceability, that information will help pinpoint what happened on the days surrounding an outbreak. Other things include shower in and out or Danish methods of entry to change into farm coveralls and boots. And if you're coming from the outside and can't shower, at least changing into clean boots and coveralls, again, to prevent risk of disease transmission into the farm. We've mentioned sanitation, and this is a huge component. And so when you're looking at any kind of cleaning and sanitation, it's so important to remove the organic material prior to using any kind of disinfectant product, because organic materials such as shavings, mud, bedding, other dirt, manure really need to be removed, because many of our cleaning and disinfection products can't clean through a lot of these organic materials. Lastly, it really is important to allow for drying if at all possible, because drying will also act as a natural barrier and killer of pathogens. Now, a lot of folks in the United States are utilizing forced heat. So heating different things, especially trailers, at 160 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 to 15 minutes. And that really is a little bit different because you're wanting the trailers to reach that 160-degree temperature. So it takes longer time to actually achieve those temperatures. But if you combine that with drying and disinfection, the addition of heating, or as we call it, baking of trailers and equipment, that really reduces pathogens. And that is so critical when we're trying to prevent transmission of diseases or entry of diseases into a herd. I know at last week's webinar, there was the discussion of feed risk and feed risk management, but that's a new thing that we're starting to look at. However, the moving of feeds is not new. We do know that movement of feed from the mills to the farms can be a point or focus for disease transmission. So it's really important to make sure the trucks and trailers are clean that are hauling feed, that the drivers wear protective foot coverings, and also follow a health pyramid or a health system that moves from farms of highest risk to farms of the lowest risk. That way, again, looking at how can we minimize or reduce the amount of disease spread or transmission. Also, it really is important to look at what are we doing in the mill to reduce diseases. Can we bring in our grains safely and not have contamination from the road or from mud? Doing things that we can to avoid those contamination points are critical. Looking at reduction of visitors into the mill, because again, if a mill becomes contaminated, it's very difficult to clean up a mill adequately to say it's pathogen free. And so these are things that we're really looking at right now and trying to understand what happens inside of the mill, in addition to what are the risk factors as we deliver our feed. So the two major swine biosecurity programs in the US, the first is the Pork Quality Assurance Program, and it was developed really to provide for food safety. But as you can imagine, biosecurity is a core component of this program, because we want our producers to follow a basic set of biosecurity guidelines so they're reducing the chance of a disease introduction, because less disease in a herd equals healthier pigs, which leads to less other products such as antimicrobial or vaccine needs, and eventually leads us to a healthy pork supply and pork meats for consumption. The other big program is Secure Pork Supply. This was primarily funded by USDA, but also through checkoff and producer and university support. What Secure Pork Supply is a plan that helps to standardize biosecurity steps that are needed to help maintain business continuity in the event that there is a foreign animal disease outbreak. And this is very important because secure pork supply comes into play when a producer is identified in a control area. Once an African swine fever is identified, but that producer is not positive, secure pork supply will help that producer be able to still maintain their business following key biosecurity steps and observation and sampling, and still be able to hopefully move their pigs out of the control zone safely and at less risk to other farms. So Secure Pork, I've got the resource listed below. It's www.securepork.org. It has a comprehensive listing of resources, templates, and guidelines that show producers what they need to do to enroll and to basically participate in the program. Again, it's a business continuity plan, but this is also a voluntary plan. It is not mandatory. And so the key elements are traceability. And so producers need to have a premises identification number, and that allows us to be able to track animals and movements if a farm ever should become positive. And those things, as you can see, maintain an entry log book, maintain PINs to identify lab submissions, and just to be able to track movements around the site. If we can understand where pigs have gone, we can understand how to really mitigate and track disease and get an outbreak under control quickly. Enhanced biosecurity is key. This is just a shot of the document to have for a plan. And this is very important because PQA and Secure Pork Supply all focus on very core principles of biosecurity. And then during an outbreak, Secure Pork Supply provides guidance for what additional biosecurity would need to be in play to help producers through this challenging time. And so key points are having a biosecurity manager help develop the farm, develop a plan, and that may already be an existing person, but their focus is really on biosecurity. It also it looks at training, make sure all staff members understand the biosecurity practices and what they mean, and then also follow other procedures as needed to help prevent disease entry. Another key part is the disease monitoring, and that really looks at observations, recording of disease signs and symptoms on a daily basis, or even just recording that the pigs are healthy. It also involves calling someone or reporting if you notice the animals are sick or you might suspect clinical signs of disease. This can get the state veterinarians and federal veterinarians involved as necessary. And then also sample collection to be able to determine, are the farm positive or negative? So this has been a very brief and 30,000-foot overview. But we know that there are many diseases that affect pigs, including our foreign animal diseases such as African swine fever. And these are really a threat to all of us in swine production. Preventing disease entry and preparedness, if it does get here, are still two big things that we need to be focused on in these times. And we know that biosecurity plays a huge role in how we prevent disease, because if we can't address and mitigate the risks through biosecurity, then the chance of disease introduction is extremely high. Secure Pork Supply plays a huge role in that, as well as our pork quality assurance, because they're both based on core principles of biosecurity for disease prevention. And remember, biosecurity doesn't have to be complex. It can be simple to be very effective, but it's so important to do those things each and every day. And then go back and assess each and every action to make sure that it really is addressing risk. And with that, I will turn it back over to Courtney in case there's any additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was very informative. And I think revisiting the basics of biosecurity is something we probably can't do enough. If you have questions as someone that is watching this seminar, please put them in the Q&A. We will follow up with them when we get to the panel portion. But for now, we're going to move to Dr. Antignoli, and she is going to talk about regionalization and compartmentalization. You know, Lisa put a slide up about how many countries are experiencing specifically ASF, and there are mechanisms in place globally for how countries must report when they have an outbreak of a disease such as ASF. And that's important to understand, especially in the event if anything should become present in the Americas region or the United States. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Celia. Thank you in advance.
Muchas gracias y muy buenos días a todos. Es un placer estar nuevamente con ustedes en este tercer seminario. Esta vez focalizándonos un poco más en los conceptos de zonificación o regionalización y compartimentalización. Y estos conceptos no son solo válidos para la peste porcina africana, sino para cualquier enfermedad de animales que cause efectos económicos y de producción. En el caso de la industria porcina, ciertamente la peste porcina clásica es una de las tantas enfermedades que nos preocupan y que, por supuesto, si se introduce en un país, causa, como ya lo ha mencionado la doctora Beckton, una interrupción significativa del comercio internacional, y si afecta a una parte de un país, también del comercio doméstico. Entonces, el mayor deseo, calculo, de todos nosotros es poder decir que nuestros países están libres de esta enfermedad, y aquí en América lo podemos decir con respecto a la peste porcina africana. Si tuviéramos una introducción, cuando un país tiene una introducción, muchas veces el deseo es por lo menos tener una parte del país que permita continuar el comercio internacional. Y este es un poco el rol de estos conceptos de zonificación o compartimentalización. Es tener una subpoblación o varias subpoblaciones que estén protegidas de la enfermedad, que podemos demostrar que están protegidas y que permiten comercializar los cerdos de esas zonas. Entonces, en las láminas que siguen, voy a tratar de focalizarme en cómo se definen, cuáles son las diferencias entre estos dos conceptos de zona y compartimiento. Zona y región son términos que uso en forma intercambiable, significan lo mismo. Y cuáles son las ventajas y las desventajas. Y después, en las últimas láminas, me voy a focalizar un poco en la guía de la OIE, que es específica para la compartimentalización para la peste porcina africana, y ha sido publicada en el año 2020. Entonces, ¿cómo se definen? La zona se define fundamentalmente como una subpoblación que está definida por los límites geográficos o geopolíticos. Vale decir, puede ser un país, puede ser un área que está definida a través de ríos, montañas o accidentes naturales, o por límites políticos, los límites de un estado o los límites de un municipio, o en muchos casos son límites que se hacen a través de determinación de coordenadas. Pueden ser varias entidades nacionales conjuntas, entonces puede ser un país, puede ser un estado, pueden ser municipios, un municipio o varios en un área geográfica delimitada. Y la otra característica es que van a ser contiguos. Entonces son entidades contiguas. El compartimiento, a diferencia, es una subpoblación que está definida mayormente por los límites epidemiológicos. Y básicamente es uno o más sitios de una misma compañía. Y la característica fundamental es que están bajo un manejo y bioseguridad común. Básicamente imagínenselo como una entidad blindada, que es el blindaje es lo que le permite separarlos del resto de la población, y cuán fuerte es ese blindaje, cuán a prueba de balas ese blindaje es lo que le da fuerza a ese compartimiento y da confianza a ese compartimiento. Y los elementos más importantes de ese blindaje, de esa pared de separación, son la bioseguridad, el manejo común y la vigilancia, y son aplicados para una o más enfermedades. La otra característica del compartimiento es que puede estar en cualquier parte de una zona, de un país o de un estado, inclusive al lado de granjas que tengan infección. Entonces, para ilustrar un poco, en la parte izquierda tenemos lo que sería la zona. Entonces, en la zona que está geográficamente delimitada o políticamente delimitada, todas las granjas de todas las especies animales se van a considerar libres de la enfermedad en cuestión. Mientras que en el compartimiento, solamente los elementos, las localizaciones que pertenecen a esta entidad blindada y están protegidas por una bioseguridad y vigilancia y manejo común. Solamente ellas están libres y yo tengo que demostrar cuán separadas están de los elementos que la rodean, sean granjas o molinos de alimentos o plantas de faena que pueden estar afectadas. Entonces, ¿cómo se hace esto? ¿Quién hace la supervisión y cómo se mantienen estas dos entidades? En los dos casos necesitamos de una autoridad veterinaria competente a nivel nacional. En el caso de la zona, el rol de la autoridad veterinaria competente es establecer la zona y mantener los límites y proporcionar suficiente evidencia del estado de salud de esos animales con referencia a la enfermedad en cuestión. Determinar qué requerimientos son necesarios para poder documentar el libre de la enfermedad y cómo se certifica. En la zona, la supervisión de la zona no depende solo de la autoridad competente, sino también, en muchos casos, de las autoridades locales, del estado, del municipio o de agencias de fauna silvestre cuando también la enfermedad en cuestión afecta, por ejemplo, los cerdos ferales. En muchos casos también hay otras industrias comerciales y no comerciales, hay productores comerciales y no comerciales dentro de la zona. Y también hay otras entidades que pueden ser no agrícolas, como por ejemplo industrias farmacéuticas que estén relacionadas con la enfermedad en cuestión en la zona. En el compartimiento, mientras tanto, la autoridad nacional competente, el servicio veterinario, tiene el rol de determinar el estado de salud animal de la región o de la zona donde se localiza el compartimiento, por ejemplo, del estado o del país. Y tiene como rol también supervisar cómo se desarrolla el programa de compartimentalización. Tiene un rol fundamental en el desarrollo del marco regulatorio, en proveer consejo técnico y también en negociar el reconocimiento del compartimiento con los socios comerciales. Pero la industria tiene un rol fundamental en el compartimiento, mucho más que en la zona, porque la industria debe definir exactamente qué entidades conforman el compartimiento, cuáles son sus componentes, y tienen que establecer y mantener los requerimientos de manejo y de bioseguridad que son esenciales para ese blindaje de la entidad que es el compartimiento. ¿Cuáles son los componentes de cada uno? Bueno, en una zona vamos a tener múltiples productores de diferentes categorías. Vamos a tener productores comerciales, productores de traspatio, productores semitecnificados. Todo lo que se encuentra en esa área geográfica es parte de la zona, quieran o no. La fauna, otras autoridades, otras agencias y entidades agrícolas o no agrícolas. Mientras que el compartimiento generalmente es una sola compañía verticalmente integrada, con por lo menos dos sitios. Generalmente, si hablamos de por lo menos dos, decimos que generalmente es una granja y el molino de alimentos, o un elemento que tenga un vínculo muy cercano y cotidiano con los animales. Puede tener múltiples sitios y todos los ingresos tienen que estar controlados. Y todos los egresos están procesados por las mitigaciones y por las mitigaciones del riesgo. Vale decir, si el egreso es un animal vivo del compartimiento, ese animal ha sido afectado por todas las mitigaciones de bioseguridad que permiten garantizar que ese animal está libre. Si el egreso es carne porcina, lo mismo. Entonces, ¿cuáles son las semejanzas? En los dos casos, lo que estamos tratando es de salvar una subpoblación que queda documentada como libre, que nos permita continuar la comercialización, tanto internacional como doméstica. En los dos casos yo tengo que entender cuáles son los riesgos de introducción de la enfermedad, cómo se transmite y cuál es la epidemiología para poder mitigar la introducción y para poder mitigar esos riesgos. En los dos casos hay consideraciones espaciales, mucho más en la zona, que es lo que fundamentalmente define la zona, pero también en el compartimiento, porque por ejemplo, si tengo un compartimiento donde los diferentes sitios están en diferentes estados o municipios, yo tengo que poder entender cuál es la situación alrededor de esas localidades en cuanto a la enfermedad y ajustar el manejo y la bioseguridad de acuerdo con los riesgos en cada localidad. Y los dos conceptos necesitan que los socios comerciales los reconozcan. Sin esto no hay ni zonificación ni compartimentalización. Y ese es un poco el rol de la autoridad competente con el apoyo de la industria. Las diferencias, bueno, ya vimos que cómo se definen en cuanto a los límites es una diferencia grande. Para la zona son los límites geográficos o geopolíticos. Para el compartimiento es el manejo y la bioseguridad. ¿Cómo se mantienen? Para la zona, como los límites son geopolíticos, todo lo que sean las medidas sanitarias, incluyendo y especialmente el control de movimientos hacia la zona, es fundamental. Sobre todo porque nada puede ingresar a la zona que sea de un estado sanitario inferior al estado de salud en la zona. Entonces, lo único que puede entrar en la zona son animales de establecimientos u otras regiones libres. En el compartimiento se mantiene verificando la integridad de esos elementos fundamentales que hacen el blindaje, que permiten el aislamiento, que son la vigilancia epidemiológica y la bioseguridad. Otro aspecto muy importante es cuándo se activan estos conceptos. La zona es fácil activarla en una situación de brote, dependiendo de dónde ocurre el brote. Es mucho más rápida de activación. El compartimiento requiere muchísimos pasos y muchísimas relaciones entre la industria, las autoridades locales, las autoridades nacionales, reconocimientos, sobre todo porque el compartimiento, la gran ventaja del compartimiento es que puede subsistir aunque alrededor haya enfermedad. Entonces, requiere un proceso mucho más largo y hay que establecerlo en tiempos de paz, no en tiempos de brote. Nuevamente, ¿quién lo maneja? En la zona, la autoridad veterinaria, el servicio veterinario oficial tiene un rol mucho más preponderante, mientras que en el compartimiento es más que nada el sector privado, con apoyo de la autoridad veterinaria, pero es el sector privado el que fundamentalmente hace la propuesta de cómo se va a sustanciar el libre de enfermedad en esa entidad. Y después está el costo, que eso es muy importante. En la zona, generalmente, el costo es básicamente acarreado por el Estado. Es público, principalmente con un poco de apoyo de la industria. Pero el compartimiento, la gran inversión, es de la compañía, de la industria que desea compartimentalizar y ser reconocida como tal. Nuevamente, ¿cuáles son los beneficios de la zona? Bueno, en la zona todos los animales en la región gozan del beneficio de estar libres de la enfermedad. La implementación requiere una inversión privada limitada. Es fundamentalmente un costo que acarrea el servicio veterinario oficial, el Estado. Y es más rápida de implementar en una situación de brote que un compartimiento. Los contras de las limitaciones es que cuando un animal en la zona se enferma, toda la zona se afecta y todas las restricciones comerciales aplican a toda la zona. Y por supuesto, tiene una implementación compleja porque en muchos casos tenemos que poder definir bien los límites comerciales. En muchos casos tenemos muchas autoridades municipales, estatales y de varias industrias que participan en la formación y la supervisión del compartimiento. Para el compartimiento, los beneficios es que los animales de esa subpoblación mantienen su estado aunque las granjas de alrededor estén afectadas. En tanto y en cuanto yo pueda documentar que mi bioseguridad y mi manejo continúan siendo lo suficientemente fuertes. Como dice, permite la separación de otros animales de estado sanitario desconocido. Y entonces, más allá de la localización de este compartimiento, aunque haya brote en ese estado o en ese país, el compartimiento puede continuar con la comercialización. Pero las contras son que solo beneficia a los animales de ese compartimiento, de esa compañía y de esas localidades que se han definido en el compartimiento. Es costoso y es lento, porque hay que crear todo un marco regulatorio para poder reconocerlo. Y si se afecta un animal de ese compartimiento, el compartimiento pierde el estado y tiene que reaprobarse y reconocerse. O sea, hay que empezar de vuelta, básicamente. Los estándares son los requerimientos y esos requerimientos son básicamente comunes para las dos entidades. Hay que poder definir la magnitud, ¿no? ¿Cuál es la zona, qué conforma la zona o cuál es el compartimiento y quién lo conforma, dónde está localizado? Los dos requieren el control y la supervisión del servicio veterinario, aunque en diferentes modalidades. En los dos tengo que poder definir y documentar la historia de la enfermedad y si ha habido vacunación. Y si ha habido vacunación, ¿qué tipo de vacunación? ¿Ha sido esa vacunación de tipo DIVA, que me permite diferenciar animales vacunados de infectados o no? En los dos casos tengo que poder definir la constitución demográfica de los animales, vale decir, son animales de terminación, se incluye todo el ciclo de producción y la trazabilidad. Tengo que poder demostrar la separación epidemiológica de la infección. Los dos conceptos requieren de capacidades de laboratorios de diagnóstico y de capacidades de laboratorio de diagnóstico certificados, con certificaciones de tipo internacional, de reconocimiento internacional. Los dos conceptos necesitan de vigilancia epidemiológica y el tipo de vigilancia va a depender de las condiciones en que se encuentre la zona y las zonas alrededor y el riesgo. Y los dos tienen que tener un programa de respuesta a emergencias y de preparación, un programa de contingencia. ¿Qué es lo que van a hacer si hay brotes alrededor? ¿Qué es lo que van a hacer si existe un brote en la zona o en el compartimiento? Entonces esto ya es focalización en más la peste porcina africana. Este es material presentado en las guías de compartimentalización de la OIE. Entonces, como ven aquí, esta es una ilustración de cómo se puede definir el compartimiento, ¿no? para la peste porcina africana. Entonces, el compartimiento puede ser que me focalice solamente en decir, quiero tener cerdos vivos, libres de peste porcina africana, o a lo mejor quiero todo un compartimiento más complejo, donde los productos libres van a ser los subproductos más los cerdos. cuanto más integración requiere el compartimiento, más complejo es, más costoso es y más difícil de establecer. Estos que se ven aquí son los ingresos que tengo que poder controlar y documentar que tienen, que no tienen riesgo. Entonces, el alimento, el material genético, los materiales de cama y otros ingresos misceláneos, como por ejemplo las vacunas, las medicaciones, las suplementaciones, etc. La separación epidemiológica está dada por dos tipos de enfoques. Uno, hay que hacer un análisis de riesgo. Tengo que identificar cuáles son los riesgos de incorporar la enfermedad y cada camino de entrada. El riesgo de que entre a través de la comida, el riesgo de que entre a través de los grupos de vacunación, de que entre a través de los grupos que vienen a arreglar o hacer mantenimiento de los galpones. ¿Cuál es el riesgo de que entre a través de la cama de los animales? Y lo tengo que calificar y tengo que determinar cuál sería la consecuencia. Y la parte del manejo de riesgos es qué mitigación yo voy a poner, voy a contrarrestar ese riesgo y me va a permitir minimizar ese riesgo. Entonces, básicamente, eso es lo que hacemos con un sistema, con el desarrollo de un sistema de bioseguridad, que básicamente tiene tres patas, es como un banquito de tres patas. Consiste en la separación, la limpieza y la desinfección. Otra forma muy importante y otro elemento muy importante del manejo de riesgo es la vigilancia epidemiológica que tiene que existir tanto en el compartimiento como alrededor. Y por supuesto también la identificación y la trazabilidad de los animales. Para enfocarnos un poco más en los detalles de la vigilancia, dijimos que la vigilancia tenía que estar dentro del compartimiento y fuera del compartimiento. ¿Por qué fuera del compartimiento? Porque yo tengo que probarles a mis socios comerciales cuál es el riesgo de la enfermedad alrededor de estas entidades. Entonces, es responsabilidad de la autoridad competente del servicio veterinario proveer alguna documentación del estado sanitario alrededor del compartimiento. Y dentro del compartimiento es más un poco la responsabilidad de la industria que establece el compartimiento. Tengo que tener un sistema de vigilancia que sea sensible, que sea puntual, digamos, no puedo estar haciendo vigilancia muy de vez en cuando, tiene que ser una vigilancia permanente y que sea representativa. Si tengo 5 localidades, no puedo estar haciendo vigilancia en muestreo en una sola. O sea, tiene que tener un fundamento estadístico. Tengo que tener un sistema de detección rápida. Hay que estar observando los cerdos, enviando muestras y estar permanentemente asegurando que esa enfermedad no está presente. El sistema de detección tiene que ser aprobado y certificado, como dijimos, tiene que haber pruebas de laboratorio y tengo que tener una definición de caso. ¿Qué es la definición de caso? Es un documento que describe los signos clínicos de la enfermedad y qué es lo que voy a hacer si tengo animales con esos signos clínicos. ¿Qué pruebas van a ser aceptables y qué acciones van a ser aceptables dependiendo de los resultados? La vigilancia tiene que estar hecha a medida de las condiciones epidemiológicas de la zona o del país y de acuerdo con el riesgo de introducción. Si estoy en un país libre de enfermedad, obviamente la vigilancia va a estar un poco más relajada, los requerimientos van a ser más relajados que si tengo enfermedad todo alrededor del compartimiento. Entonces, como dije antes, la vigilancia es uno de esos elementos que establecen el blindaje del compartimiento y que permiten caracterizar cuán fuerte es esa es esa separación del resto de la población porcina. Algunos componentes adicionales. En el caso de el compartimiento requiere un marco regulatorio. Aquí en Estados Unidos hemos desarrollado un compartimiento de pollos de carne que comenzó su desarrollo en el 2015 y recién ahora se está completando. En ese marco regulatorio es sumamente importante que no haya ambigüedades, que sea sumamente específico el alcance y los objetivos del compartimiento y que se defina muy bien qué es el compartimiento y qué son los requerimientos y los estándares, y que haya una clara definición de los poderes, de la autoridad y de los roles y responsabilidades de cada una de las entidades. En este compartimiento de pollos hay una gran interacción entre la Autoridad Veterinaria Nacional, el Servicio Veterinario LEIFIS, las autoridades estatales y la industria, todo en el marco de lo que nosotros llamamos NPIP, que es el Programa Nacional de Mejoramiento de Salud Aviar. Y por supuesto, todas las responsabilidades y roles de la autoridad veterinaria del país exportador, qué documentación tiene que proveer el país exportador, qué requerimientos va a tener y va a aceptar el país importador, y los roles y responsabilidades del sector privado y de la industria son sumamente importantes documentar en ese marco de preparación y de determinación del compartimiento. Y por último, esta es una figura que ilustra un poco más las características del compartimiento, donde nosotros aquí tenemos el compartimiento que está definido por varios componentes, que puede ser, por ejemplo, diferentes localidades, puede tener una planta de proceso, o puede ser que los elementos que salen del compartimiento vayan a una planta de proceso exterior. Pero entonces esta planta de proceso, si va a garantizar que el producto es libre, tiene que proveer suficiente documentación de que no faena animales afectados o de que tiene la capacidad de infaliblemente separar esas dos subpoblaciones. También, como vemos, tenemos insumos que entran al compartimiento y que tienen que venir o de zona libre, o si no vienen de zona libre, tienen que ser mitigados adecuadamente. ¿Qué mitigaciones? Bueno, tal vez tengan que hacer pruebas o tengan que tener, supongo que si es alimentación, tenga que tener el suficiente periodo de descanso como para asegurar que no hay actividad viral. Y por supuesto tenemos los roles de la actividad de la entidad veterinaria nacional, supervisando y comunicándose con el país importador, que es el que establece los requerimientos de importación. Y con esto concluyo mi presentación y estoy dispuesta y disponible aquí para las preguntas que tengan. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Celia. Great information. We are getting some questions in the chat, which we will respond to at our Q&A session. So please keep putting them in there if you have them. Our last panel discussion is again going to be from Dr. Lisa Becton with the Pork Board. And I asked her to share some more information on making risk-based and data-driven decision-making when it comes to regionalization and compartmentalization. And specifically, the United States has implemented something called AgView, which I think would be good just for everyone to understand a little bit more about and potentially see how we could look to implement it in other countries across the Americas region. So Dr. Becton, back to you again.
All right, thank you. pull these slides up. Okay, thank you again. I'm going to give you all a very brief overview of AgView as an operating system or a data management system and what its role is in a disease outbreak. And so we've had over the last several years different exercises basically looking at what would happen in the event a foreign animal disease would get here into the United States. This is a picture of basically one of the recent ASF emergency trials that was held, I think it was back in 2019. And the really interesting part of these exercises is that they involved at least 14 different states and producers, veterinarians, USDA, our state governments all actively participated in this highly coordinated exercise. And these exercises are very, very important because they not only stimulate what would happen, but they, in a very logical progression, outline what are the actions that are needed, what information is needed, and how quickly that information is needed. And so they help highlight a lot of things that we're doing well, but they also highlight what are our current challenges and give us ideas of what do we do to improve and to get better. Because if we don't perform these exercises, we really don't understand where our weaknesses are until we have a disease outbreak. Back in 2015, the US experienced a high-path avian influenza outbreak, predominantly in Minnesota and Iowa. And that gave a very good view of what would happen in the event of a foreign animal disease outbreak. And so we took a lot of learnings from those exercises and applied it to our operating plan in the pork industry for what we need to do in the event of a disease outbreak. So Celia gave a very good overview of different issues with disease response. And so this is going to be a dynamic slide, but if we have a farm go positive, they're going to be identified in what we call the infected zone. There is a zone around that site called the buffer zone that is a space in between the infected farms and the space between non-affected farms. These two areas combined are called the control area. And this area is going to be very important for how we view all of our surveillance, our animal movements, and all things surrounding that. And this is going to be very important for disease response. Dr. Antonioli also mentioned surveillance. There is a surveillance zone included in this diagram because outside of the control area, we need to understand what else is at risk and where else the disease might be, but also give assurance that there is no disease in those surveillance zones and free areas. And so contact premises are premises that we know have had some degree of interaction. One can be in the control area, one can be outside. There's suspect premises of we think they may have disease. They're either in the stage of testing to identify it. And then there's other at-risk premises that we know exist in these areas but don't have clinical disease that we know of. There are also monitored premises that are being evaluated for disease, but again have not shown clinical signs. And all of this I'll make a little bit more clear of why we look at this response. And that, just to make note, is going to be a very standard response for how both USDA and our state governments assess each and every outbreak site. Now, this picture highlights some activities that we were doing with our pork producers. And what it shows is a model scale of farms and what would happen if an outbreak occurs in any one degree of these type of farms. And so the participants get to understand all the different intricacies of a disease outbreak through these models versus obviously having to deal with it on farm. And these models are really intended to help people conceptualize what do we need to do for disease control and identification. Because unfortunately, when we get an outbreak, none of these things happen in slow time. It all happens very rapidly. People are very excited and very concerned. And so we want to make sure that we know how to react in what we call peacetime versus outbreak time. So with any foreign animal disease response, what do we need to know? And this has been covered, but just a quick review, we really have to know where the disease is and where it isn't. And that, at least for the US and our operating plan, is intended to happen within that first 72 hours. At least what that will do is shut down all movements so we can start the whole process of understanding where's the key premises that's positive. Are there any other areas around that that are also positive? But until we know that information, we're essentially flying blind. And so the other component to knowing where those farms are is to have that information in real time. A lot of our producers have really good records and record keeping, but not everything is an electronic format that can be shared and shared rapidly and shared to multiple people. And so some systems are electronic, but many are not. And so there's got to be ways to look at how do we get that information out to people, to our state and federal partners, so they can respond accurately and quickly. So there are some challenges that we've identified over the last several years doing these different exercises. And one of those is really a software program or some kind of electronic reporting system that can transmit data from a producer, from a laboratory, to our state and federal partners for these disease responses. And a lot of that information is information that we don't normally share, such as individual animal movements, things like our premises identification numbers for farms. We have a lot of that information, but sometimes they don't always match up on the physical location of the farm. And so what is important is to make sure the premises ID number matches up with the physical latitude and longitude of that farm. The other thing we've got to note is, what is the demographics of this farm? Is it a 5-barn sow unit? Is it a 10-barn grow finish operation? Is it a boar stud? Having these key pieces of information will help characterize each farm, where they're at and what's going on. And like I said, the pig movements and diagnostic tests have all been completely separate pieces of information. And so that's why we've been really excited at the Pork Board to be able to develop the AgView database and tracking system, or data aggregation system, to be able to finally track and be able to report a lot of these disparate information pieces. And so the AgView system really is designed to help in emergency response. And last November in 2020, we started having producers enter some of their data into the main system, and have been since that time keeping that data current. And we needed to do a staggered launch, because you can never have a big data system and all of a sudden throw all this information at it and expect it to work and work right. So we have been actively working in the system and trying to see where its challenges are and keep upgrading as we go. What we're working on now is essentially going through and across all of the pork chain to have people be knowledgeable about AgView and what it can do, and also to create accounts to sign up. And so I'll get into a little bit of demographics of who's doing what in a minute. So this is the homepage, or one of the homepages for AgView. You can see the web address at www.agview.com, and that can show you what pieces of information are needed to essentially create an account. So what is and isn't this process or this program? AgView really isn't intended to replace any kind of data reporting system. Most people are familiar with things like PigChamp or MetaFarms data systems as some of their electronic production record keeping systems. AgView is not really replacing that. What AgView does is it allows people to, in a standardized format, visualize their data. And I'll give you examples of that here in a couple of slides. But it's a way that it can aggregate all of these different pieces from different areas, lump them together, and be able to transmit that information to people who need it to make key decisions. AgView doesn't replace Secure Pork Supply because, again, it's not intended to replace data systems. But what it does do is allow producers to enter their secure pork supply status. And so when a state veterinarian wants to know, is a producer in secure pork supply, they would be able to tap into AgView and say, yep, producer X is in secure pork supply, and they have all of their data that's necessary to be in secure pork supply available upon permission to help in the disease response. And so things that a state veterinarian could look at when they're managing a disease in their state is where the animals are located, how the animals are moving, what's the biosecurity plan of that farm, and then any lab results and observational data, all of those key components in secure pork supply, and a lot of that data that Dr. Antonioli was talking about that helps being able to look at compartmentalization. Now, one thing a lot of producers in the United States are concerned about is permissioning of data. And AgView is permissioned, and so producers have to allow permission of some of the detailed data. However, if a producer participates in AgView, a lot of the basic data that is in AgView, such as premise identification and producer context, that would automatically be available for USDA and state veterinarians to see in the event that an outbreak is identified in the US. Otherwise, producers do have to provide permission for people to see their specific data. So the other big thing is really this disease contact tracing. AgView allows for that because it will allow for capturing of individual movement data. So for example, if you are a sow farm that sends weaned pigs to an offsite nursery, AgView will be able to track that data, and that may occur at any time, whether it's one time a day, one time a month, one time a year. AgView can capture that data. And so other data include movements to slaughter, movements to finishers. If you have gilt development, it will identify those. If you have bores and bore studs, it will identify those movements. And so right now, a lot of producers may capture this through bill of sale or bill of transfer, but they don't really track this individual movement data. And this is going to be the information that's going to be very, very time consuming to track right up front if we have that first identification of a disease. And making this information electronic will really speed up that time to detection, but also the time to getting animals and farms back to normal as quickly as we can. So we know that African swine fever probably won't be identified or found the first absolute day it hits a farm, because it takes time for incubation, it takes some time for clinical signs. So we know we're moving pigs around in that given time. And we already know within the United States on any given day, there's roughly 1 million pigs moving somewhere. And so we understand that there's going to be a lot of movements happen before we fully identify where those pigs have been. And we probably are going to be dealing with a multi-state response. And so having that key data is going to be so important to be able to help and work with our government officials where these farms have sent pigs, so we can go and accurately test and track and set up those control areas and the control zones as quickly as possible. Along with that, you know, when we sit and look at words on a screen, it gets harder, but when you can visualize that data and visualize where farms are and where other pigs are, that makes the response that much easier to grasp and manage. So this picture is an example of a data map that's in the AgView system. And so you can identify the red circle is where a positive farm may be. And you can see these blue arrows of where pigs have gone to. And these orange dots are suspect sites now because they received those pigs. These blue dots are farms that are around them. And these larger circles also show that there are 4 farms in a very tight area. But you can track all the data and movements of pigs all in this particular area and be able to understand where are farms at risk, where are farms that are positive, and what other farms did they contact. And so this is going to be extremely important for our disease tracing. So that's just a really brief overview of AgView. And so without going into a full-on demonstration, it really does have a large role to play in helping visualize producer data and get that data to both our state and federal partners. It really isn't replacing our existing production databases, but it does help provide a one-stop location where data can be collected and then sent all in one piece to key individuals. Producers get to keep and track and enter their own data, and the system will help download a lot of data for them. So once a count is created, you're not having to manually enter a lot of data. And this system really is going to help make us more effective as a country to help visualize and respond to diseases. And I mentioned before, we've made a lot of efforts to visit with both our federal and state partners on getting signed up or getting an account. We currently have 19 state animal health associations that are signed up to use this program. And that may not sound like a lot because we have 52 states in the United States. However, those 19 state veterinarians are from all of the key pork production states. And so we may have states that have farms, but there may be 1 or 2 farms. But all of the key pork producing states have state veterinarians that have and created an account. We know we've got at least 200 producers that are signed up that have multiple locations and farms. The other component is we are working with some major data production data companies such as MetaFarms and PigChamp. So now producers, if they're using either of those 2 production data systems, AgView will connect directly with those. And then lastly, AgView has also worked on an operating system that can directly talk with our laboratories. So there's about 4 main swine diagnostic laboratories that see probably 90% of swine submissions. We're working on developing it with others, but AgView can connect directly with those. And then lastly, we're also working with AgView to connect with USDA's EMERS database, or the Emergency Management Response System. That is the database that USDA uses to basically run and operate a disease response with. And so with all of us working together and AgView being able to help provide information and aggregate this data, we think we can really speed up the time to respond and respond more accurately and effectively. And that's what we want to do. And the quicker we can get our production systems back to operating normally, the better off we all are. And with that, Courtney, I will open it up for questions. I have also added Dr. Patrick Webb because he really is our AgView expert, way more so than I am. So I've got both of our names up here, but Dr. Webb has been involved basically from the ground up in developing and working, trialing, and promoting this system. So I will leave with you with that. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lisa. So we have a couple minutes left, and we do have a couple of questions in the chat. So the first one is, what is the main difference between classical diseases in pigs compared to African swine fever? So what makes ASF unique?
I think from a producer perspective, African swine fever right now, we don't have that. And that is a disease that is listed by the World Animal Health Organization as being a foreign animal disease and a disease that we all have to report. And that's because the impacts are extremely devastating. It's a disease we don't have. It's a disease we don't want. And we compare that with other diseases such as influenza or PRRS or mycoplasma. While they also have distinct impacts on swine production, they're not necessarily recognized as being impactful for the entire world. We all battle them, and they're still, if you ask a producer that has PRRS and a PRRS outbreak, it impacts them greatly, but it's how they're viewed on sort of the world level and the classifications. Now, the kicker is African swine fever can look like a lot of our common diseases. And so African swine fever can look like an aggressive PRRS outbreak. It could look like an aggressive Salmonella outbreak. And so that's why it's so important to be able to sample and test for diseases if you have a concern, and just to observe on a daily basis if something changes dramatically, especially mortality or disease presentation, to alert a veterinary authority for diagnosis.
Yes, Celia, any additional thoughts to that?
Sí, solamente enfatizar lo que la doctora Beckton comentaba. Tanto la peste porcina clásica como la peste porcina africana son enfermedades transfronterizas para la mayor parte de los países y que afectan significativamente el comercio internacional. No tanto otras enfermedades que son importantes para la industria como el PRRS o el micoplasma, esas no impactan el comercio internacional de la misma manera. Específicamente en cuanto a la patogénesis o la patología, es muy difícil diferenciarlas. Tal vez lo que veíamos en el primer seminario es que el virus de la peste porcina africana tiene más avidez por las células de los macrófagos sanguíneos, mientras que la peste porcina clásica se multiplica más en el tejido linfático, pero básicamente es imposible diferenciarlas si no fuera por las técnicas diagnósticas. Pero lo que sí, y esto es para contestar otra pregunta del chat, ninguna de las dos enfermedades afecta a las personas, ni ninguna de las dos enfermedades afecta a otra especie que no sea la especie de cerdos.
Great. That was the next question in the queue. So thanks for clarifying that. And one additional for you on international organizations, Celia. Is there any international standard like ISO, FAO, or Codex, or something else that dictates biosecurity practices?
No para la peste porcina africana necesariamente. Sí hay normas de bioseguridad, por ejemplo, de Codex para la triquina, que en muchos casos pueden ser efectivas para cualquier otra enfermedad. Pero las normas de bioseguridad generalmente están establecidas en comunicación la industria con el servicio veterinario oficial. Por ejemplo, en Estados Unidos nosotros tenemos la interacción o el apoyo dado por el USDA al desarrollo de los planes de bioseguridad del Secure Pork Supply, donde hay un delineamiento de bioseguridad que es la base de cualquiera de estos conceptos de zonificación o de compartimentalización o de certificación y que garantizan un estándar de bioseguridad o una guía de bioseguridad para la industria y que está desarrollada de acuerdo con todas las partes que tienen influencia en la industria, tanto el servicio oficial como el estatal y la industria también.
Lisa, anything additional to add from your perspective as industry?
You know, I think Dr. Antognoli covered that very well. We are also looking at working with other countries, not in ISO certification, but basically saying, here's what we're doing for secure pork supply and PQA, and how would that fit in with other international guidelines or requests? Because, you know, other countries and companies that are international do require or ask for different things from producers. And so what we're doing is utilizing those key programs and saying, this is what we're doing in the US. Is this also acceptable in other areas and especially in other countries, trying to normalize what we're doing and to make sure that it does meet other standards. It won't be a certification, it's just more of a review to, again, ensure that producers are doing things that they need to do that satisfy a lot of different audiences. And that's based off secure pork because, again, just like Dr. Antognoli said, that it is developed directly with USDA and producers. And so that's going to be our gold standard.
Excellent. We have two final questions. I'll throw them both out at the same time. The first is, in a multi-species farm, what is the sanitary management that should be followed in the presence of a pig disease? And the second is, are there previous compensation plans in pig farms that report the presence of a disease like ASF?
Yo puedo tomar la segunda, es el tema de indemnización. Y este es un tema complejo y es un tema de mucha preocupación para la industria. Nosotros sí tenemos planes de indemnización que tratamos de desarrollar anticipadamente a un brote. Hay muchos desafíos en el desarrollo de planes de indemnización, que es cuánto se va a pagar por animal y dependiendo de las características de los animales y del valor de animales. Hay diferentes enfoques de cómo se puede atacar este problema y por supuesto es un tema que la autoridad veterinaria tiene que desarrollar en combinación con la industria para que tenga aceptación y para no tener problemas más tarde. De manera que sí, nosotros tenemos planes de indemnización, tenemos guías de indemnización que se desarrollan anticipadamente y que forman parte de la preparación que los países tienen que hacer para casos de brotes. Ciertamente es uno de los temas que forman parte de los planes de preparación y planes de contingencia.
Thank you.
to look at how you would handle multiple species on a farm affected by a pig disease, you would really need to go back and look at the layout of the farm. So for example, if you had cattle or sheep and goats on a farm, the impact to those species really would be movements in and out of that farm, especially if you had to, say, load calves to a feedlot. If that premise and operation is under quarantine for African swine fever, any movement of anything in and out of that farm is going to have to go through specific biosecurity protocols, and that includes feeds. And so if you have to bring in feed that's outside of the control area of the quarantine of the farm premise, that will have to undergo different biosecurity. And same thing with outwards of shipping. And so that really is going to be the impact. As far as the animals themselves, it may be more logistic things like keeping animals away from barns or from pig areas and prevent commingling. Not that the other animals will be infected, but it may be more a physical contamination. So if cattle are near outdoor production, you wouldn't want cattle to be able to get manure or things like that on their hides. And so there may be logistical separations and things like that, but really the management is going to be looking at ins and outs of the farm, exposure of the other species physically in contact with the barns or other areas. And there's probably going to be a lot of other issues, but I go to those main ones.
Appreciate that. Well, we are at time. I'd like to thank our two speakers. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Celia. On behalf of the U.S. Soybean Export Council, we thank you, and we thank all of our participants. If anybody has any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to our panelists or your USEC representative. Thank you very much, and let's all do our best to help mitigate the risks and presence of African swine fever in the Western Hemisphere. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.